car factory can cost $2 billion to build, and it can still lose money every single day it runs below 80% capacity. Most people assume the hard part of owning a car factory is the engineering. Get the assembly line right, stamp the metal, bolt on the parts, and the cars practically sell themselves. That's the mental model almost everyone starts with. It's completely wrong. A single modern auto plant runs somewhere between $500 million and $2 billion just to build before a single car rolls off the line. And that plant doesn't become profitable until it's running at around 80% of its rated capacity, year after year. Fall below that line for even a few quarters, and the fixed costs, the robots, the building, the tooling, the salaried staff, keep draining cash exactly as fast as if the plant were running full speed. That's why almost nobody funds a car factory alone. They bring in government incentives, tax abatements, supplier financing, sometimes an entire consortium of investors carrying enormous capital risk long before the first vehicle earns a dollar. From the outside, this looks like a manufacturing business: steel, robots, workers in coveralls. From the inside, it behaves like a leveraged bet on volume, where the difference between a good year and a catastrophic one is a few percentage points of a number called capacity utilization. Say you're building a new plant for a mid-market sedan, the kind of vehicle that sells for $30,000 to $45,000. The land, the building shell, the paint shop alone, one of the most expensive single components in any plant, plus the stamping and body lines, will run you $800 million to $1.5 billion before you've hired a single line worker. Add battery production for an EV, and that number can climb past $2 billion because a battery plant is basically a second factory bolted onto the first one. Here's the catch baked into the entire model. That plant is designed around one specific platform, running at one target volume, usually between 150 and 300,000 vehicles a year. Build fewer than that, and your fixed cost per car, the depreciation on the robots, the overhead on the building, the interest on the debt, gets spread across fewer units and eats your margin alive. Build more than that, and you're paying overtime, running extra shifts, and stressing a supply chain that was never sized for it. A service business can just take on more clients. A car plant can't. It has a hard ceiling and a fragile floor, and missing either one costs you differently. To see what happens when that math fails completely, look at the DeLorean Motor Company. John DeLorean built a state-of-the-art factory in Northern Ireland in the late 1970s, backed heavily by British government investment, designed around a stainless steel sports car with a target of tens of thousands of units a year. The car became a cultural icon decades later, mostly because of a movie. But the business itself never came close to its production targets. Actual demand ran far below the volume the plant needed just to cover its fixed costs. And by 1982, the company collapsed into receivership. The factory had the machines, the design, and the brand. What it never had was the volume the fixed costs required. And that's not a one-time failure. It's a pattern that repeats every time a car company builds a factory sized for a demand that never shows up, as you're about to see. Now think about what it actually costs to keep a plant like this running once it's built. You need thousands of hourly workers, often 3,000 to 6,000 at a single large assembly plant, plus engineers, quality inspectors, and plant management. In union environments, total compensation including benefits and pension obligations can run $60 to $80 an hour once healthcare and legacy costs are included. Add maintenance technicians, a paint crew working under strict environmental permitting, and a logistics team coordinating parts arriving just in time from hundreds of different suppliers, and payroll alone can exceed $500 million a year before a single component is even purchased. And when the line goes down, that payroll doesn't stop. Workers are still drawing full pay while the fixed costs of the building keep running exactly as if the plant were at full speed. Here's where the business gets genuinely strange. A car plant doesn't actually make most of its own car. Automakers choose to outsource the vast majority of what goes into a vehicle because no single company can build seats, electronics, wiring harnesses, engines, glass, and tires more cheaply than a specialized supplier who makes that one part for every automaker at once. On average, 70 to 80% of a vehicle's total cost comes from purchased components, sourced from an enormous web of suppliers. The automaker becomes less like a factory and more like an assembly and integration company, stitching together thousands of parts from outside vendors under punishing delivery windows. which means the single greatest operational risk in the entire business isn't the plant itself. It's any one of those thousands of suppliers failing to deliver a single part on time. Lose one supplier of a $4 semiconductor chip, and a plant that cost $1.5 billion to build, producing $2 billion worth of vehicles a year, can sit completely idle. All 5,000 workers still drawing full pay, all the fixed costs still running, while the line waits on a part smaller than a fingernail. This exact scenario played out across the entire industry during the 2021 semiconductor shortage, when automakers collectively lost tens of billions of dollars in production, not because they built bad cars, but because a part costing pennies simply wasn't available. Next time your car's been on backorder for 6 weeks, somewhere, a $5 part held an entire billion-dollar building hostage. So if the plant barely breaks even on the sticker price of the car, where's the actual margin hiding? Not in the vehicle sale. In almost every mass-market automaker's financials, manufacturing and sales run on margins of 2 to 5%. The real profit engine sits somewhere most car buyers never think about: the captive finance arm. When a customer finances or leases through the manufacturer's own credit company, that division generates profit margins several times higher than manufacturing, because it isn't selling steel and rubber, it's selling interest rate spread on a $40,000 loan across millions of customers. Parts and service work the same way. A customer paying retail for a replacement part is often paying a margin many times higher than what the automaker made building the entire car in the first place. Then there's the dealership itself, a layer that eats into margin before the manufacturer even gets a look at it. In most markets, automakers are legally required to sell through independent franchise dealers rather than directly to consumers. Those dealers negotiate holdback payments, incentive dollars, and floor plan financing that quietly shift meaningful chunks of the vehicle's price away from the manufacturer's own books. Add in manufacturer incentive programs, the rebates and low-interest deals used to clear unsold inventory at the end of a model year, and it's entirely possible for a factory to sell every single car it builds and still watch its margin shrink to almost nothing, because the incentive dollars spent moving the metal off the lot came directly out of the plant's own profitability. Then there's the cost nobody budgets for until it happens: recalls. A single major safety recall can cost hundreds of dollars per vehicle in parts and labor, multiplied across hundreds of thousands or millions of units. Some of the largest automotive recalls in history have cost manufacturers well over $1 billion each, once you include parts, dealer labor reimbursement, legal exposure, and the brand damage that follows. Unlike a maintenance issue on one single machine, a recall affects every vehicle built on that platform, sometimes across multiple plants and multiple years of production, all at once. A more modern version of the DeLorean story is Fisker Automotive, which launched its Karma plug-in hybrid in 2011 after raising hundreds of millions of dollars, including a Department of Energy loan meant to fund a U.S. factory retrofit. Production volumes never came close to plan. Battery supplier issues triggered recalls. The company burned through its cash while producing a small fraction of the vehicles its business model assumed it would sell. By 2013, Fisker Automotive filed for bankruptcy, its factory ambitions unrealized. A second company under a similar name, Fisker Inc., later attempted an EV comeback, and it too filed for bankruptcy in 2024, undone again by production ramp problems and a factory model that assumed volumes the market never delivered. Different decade, different battery chemistry, same failure. The math never changes. A car factory is a bet that a very specific number of customers will show up every single year for years. When that bet is wrong, the fixed costs don't care how good the engineering was. So does the business actually work? It depends entirely on which version of the year you get. Here's the math worth saving. Take the optimistic case. A plant built to produce 250,000 vehicles a year at an average sale price of $38,000 generates $9.5 billion in gross vehicle revenue. Subtract purchased parts and materials at roughly 75% of that figure, and you're down to $2.4 billion. Subtract labor, plant overhead, and logistics of around $1.1 billion, and warranty and incentive costs of another $600 million, and you're left with an operating profit near $700 million. Before the financing arm's profits are even added on top. Respectable for a business most outsiders assume runs on much thinner margins than that. Now the realistic case, the one where 2 or 3 things go wrong, because in this industry, something always does. A key supplier misses deliveries for 6 weeks, cutting actual production to 210,000 units instead of 250,000, while the fixed costs of labor and overhead barely move. A recall on a prior model year adds $300 million in unplanned warranty expense. Incentive spending has to increase by another $200 million just to clear inventory that piled up during the supply disruption. None of these events are exotic. None require a scandal or a crash. They're simply the normal cost of doing business in a below-average year. Run the same plant through those numbers, and operating profit falls from $700 million down to under $100 million, or disappears into a loss entirely. On the exact same factory, with the exact same workers, building the exact same car. So where does the real money actually come from? Not the sticker price of the car alone, and not manufacturing efficiency alone. It comes from hitting volume targets year after year, controlling a supply chain of thousands of outside vendors you don't own, financing the customer's purchase yourself instead of letting a bank capture that spread, and surviving the one bad supplier failure or recall that a thinner competitor never recovers from. Because losing volume doesn't just cost you the revenue on the missing cars. It costs you the fixed cost coverage on every car you still have to build, the supplier pricing leverage that scale bought you, and the dealer relationships that keep next year's incentives from spiraling out of control. The robots aren't the asset. The factory floor isn't the asset. The asset is the years it takes to prove to suppliers, to dealers, to lenders, and to millions of customers that this particular badge on the hood is worth trusting with tens of thousands of dollars and years of ownership. The car is just what that trust happens to be built around.